A joint public hearing with the Planning Board and the City Council was held in the Council Chamber on Monday, June 17, 2009 at 6:08 p.m. for the purpose of discussing an ordinance to amend an ordinance relative to zoning. The proposed ordinance amendment adds municipal and religious reuse as a use permitted in the RC, R1, R2, R3, and I zones. Zoning districts upon the issuance of a special permit by the Planning Board. Residential and business uses may be permitted in buildings at least 4,000 square feet, at least 50 years old at the time of application, and had been in continuous municipal or religious use for at least 20 years. The amendment provides, among other things, eligibility, dimensional requirements, site plan review, historic commission, and design review board advisory comments, and parking and loading requirements. The purpose of this amendment is to allow for the reuse of buildings currently or formerly in municipal or religious use into new uses that may not otherwise be allowed on those properties to promote historic preservation, economic development, housing production, and environmental sustainability and resilience. The complete text of the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance is on file and available for inspection during the regular business hours at the office of the City Clerk, Room 1, City Hall, 93 Washington Street, Salem, Mass., or the Department of Planning and Community Development, second floor, City Hall Annex, 98 Washington Street, Salem, Mass. Notice of this meeting was posted on May 23rd, 2019 at 2:52 p.m. and advertised in the Salem News on June 3rd, 2019 and June 10th, 2019. Absent are Councilor Dominguez. In attendance are all the other councilors. In addition, we have Mayor Driscoll was here. She's still here? I'm sorry, Mayor Driscoll's not here. We have City Planner Tom Daniel. President Steve Dibble presided. President Dibble asked the planning board members to introduce themselves, starting with this end, going down kind of clockwise rather.
Alex Sykes. Carol Hamilton.
Matt Smith.
Noah Florence.
Ben Anderson.
Mason Wellstaff.
Thank you all. So we have a quorum of both the City Council and the Planning Board as required. Councilor Torrio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we, just for clarification, that the version that we are considering is the updated version dated June 12th, 2019 in our materials here.
So
Not the initial version that was submitted to council with the initial posting. So this has the updates this version has the updates and corrections that the planning department has added.
We shall be working with the draft ordinance that has a cover letter from Tom Daniel, City Planner, dated June 12, 2019. City Council, all those in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it. This will be the document that we're using tonight. Thank you. With that, I'd like to state that I envision this hearing, like all other joint public hearings with the Planning Board and the City Council, to be like a round table, if we would, that all matters that we're thinking of are discussed publicly between all of us, as if we're sitting in a round table, all discussing something and shaping something, making modifications to it, working together as a team to craft an ordinance that's in the best interests of the city. Following that, I would like to then open it up to public comment, starting with, as required here, with me, starting from this side with people in favor would like to speak, and then people opposed will go around, would like to speak on what was just discussed tonight, as well as what is in the ordinance itself, the proposed ordinance. With that, I'd like to open it up first to City Council members for comments, Planning Board members for comments, have a discussion or questions. And if there aren't a whole lot, I'd like to have Tom Daniel, our City Planner, come up and give us an update as to where we're at with these changes that were shaped. And I want to thank Historic Salem for working with the Planning Department, for Tom Daniels and his staff in particular, for crafting this revised ordinance. I think we've gone a long way to crafting something that is in the best interest of Salem, as opposed to the earlier draft, but we won't talk about that anymore. With that, if seeing no objection, if we have no objection, I'd like to start with Tom Daniel, if he can give us an overview of where we're at today with this ordinance, and then we'll open it up to questions from the city council and the planning board. Is that okay? See no objection, city planner Tom Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excuse me. So, what's before you this evening is a result of, obviously, the failed ordinance that had happened before. Ordinances, License, and Legal Affairs met in May, had a discussion preliminarily about this concept, and then we submitted this. Subsequent to submission, as the Council President mentioned, we've had a lot of discussions with community members, including Historic Salem, Inc. So I can walk through the changes that are in here, but I just wanted to underscore what how this is structured. So what's before you is creating a new use in the use table that provides for a special permit in certain zoning districts. The eligibility criteria are very similar to what had been in the prior ordinance in terms of age of structure, square footage, et cetera, and I can walk through that. A key thing that I just want to underscore, and this was one of the points of clarification with community members, is this special permit process applies to buildings. It does not apply to lots, just to buildings. So with that, I thought I could just quickly walk through the changes that are in here. So starting on the first page.
Tom, if I may,
yes.
you don't have to rush this. Let's make sure that we understand each and every change as we go through this.
Okay.
So there's no rush needed.
All right, very good. So what I did is I grouped the changes into three categories. There was corrections, changes, and then clarification / emphasis. So the first thing you'll see is the word building being inserted on the second line. Again, this was just to emphasize the point that the special permit applies to buildings and not to lots. The second point is a correction, and this was something the city solicitor had communicated to the planning board and city council, I think on May 8th, before this actually was on your agenda, and that's that this does not apply to all districts, it just applies to certain districts. So that was the first correction. The next correction is in the table of uses. So the industrial zone, this special permit would not be available in industrial zones. So that was an error that's been corrected here. The next change is also in the table of uses, again, just inserting the word building, again, for that emphasis that this is about buildings and not about lots. The next point under 6.11.2 in the first line is the last correction, which is just capitalizing the word building. The capitalized term building is already defined in our zoning ordinance, and so it should have been capitalized here. The next change is a clarification that is, again, driving home this point that the special permit applies just to buildings and not to lots. And so it states the special permit shall apply only to the building and not to any structural extensions or alterations other than those allowed under 6.11.4. So 6.11.4, those are small changes that could be allowed for public health, safety, mechanical systems, etc. The next change here, again, is a clarification. This is really just changing the way the sentence was structured by putting, stating, if the petitioner meets the requirements of this section 6.11, the planning board may approve or approve with conditions an application for such special permit. It's just changing how the sentence was structured. Folks thought that was a little clearer. On page 2, here's our first change, and so that's in the middle of the page, and this is changing the number of years. This is regarding the eligibility requirement for religious uses. So we're saying that there has to have been, we're defining religious use as a building that was substantially used for religious purposes and protected under Mass General Law 40A, Section 3, for at least 20 continuous years, including some point in the last 20 years immediately preceding an application under this section, provided, however, that a building used as a religious school must have been in that use for at least 20 continuous years, including some point in the last 50 years. So the concern with this was that 50-year time period was too long. However, it was acknowledged that the buildings that we're talking about are schools, and so if we narrow the 50-year term to just school buildings, that allowed us to move forward with a special permit for the schools. Anything else that was in religious use would need to be at the 20-year time frame. The next point on here is a clarification. Again, driving home the point that we're talking about the building and just emphasizing that here. At the bottom of that page that flows onto the top of page 3, we changed similar concerns to code compliance concerns, just to be more specific. The next change is the deletion of a paragraph. This was no longer needed because on the first page we had added in that clarifying language that the special permit shall apply only to the building and not to any structural extensions or alterations other than those allowed under 6.11.4. The next point here goes back to the deletion of industrial from the table. Once we deleted the industrial district, there was no longer the need to have this language in this paragraph that referenced industrial zoning district. So that's being deleted here. Moving on to the next page. Under section 6.11.7, there's really this paragraph with changes. Some of them are clarifications or emphasis, and the others are all tied to one change. So I'll talk about the substantive change here as well. One of the questions that had been hanging out there was, what's the role of the historical commission when a property is outside of a local historic district? And so what we did is we established a standard for review, and we're naming that standard for review as being the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Historic Rehabilitation. And then we're saying that the role of the Historical Commission, as well as the Design Review Board, is to confirm to the Planning Board that the application conforms to those standards. So the Planning Board continues to be the special permit granting authority. The Historical Commission and Design Review Board continue to have input, but we're saying what they're looking at. The purpose of their review is to confirm that the application conforms to the Secretary of the Interior standards. If the Historical Commission and Design Review Board cannot give that confirmation, then the Planning Board can't issue the special permit. So this really gives the Historical Commission and the Design Review Board that role in here. The other points for clarification here, the first one in this paragraph was just inserting the word each and adding that those boards may review the application at a joint meeting or separately, just to make it clear that the Planning Board, or rather the Design Review Board and the Historical Commission can just meet and review this in the course of the regular meeting cycle, or if they choose, they may hold a joint meeting to consider it. As I explained, the next point, the next sentence inserted is the Historical Commission and Design Review Board shall review the application for conformance to the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. That change continues with the insertion of the word confirmation. And that the application conforms to the Secretary of the Interior standards. The Planning Board may take action. It just goes on to restate what's there. If at least 60 days have passed since the delivery of the application to the Historical Commission and the Design Review Board, and the Planning Board has not received any findings from the Historical Commission or Design Review Board during the 60-day period. this last insertion for clarification was added. I think just wanted to make it clear that the Historical Commission, the Design Review Board, if they do not take any action within 60 days, the planning board may then act, so that there's still some time limit put on that review. However, we're also making it clear, and this goes on into the next sentence, that if for some reason there's a need for an extended period of review, the applicant and the planning board may agree to extend that term of review with sort of the implicit understanding that if agreement is not reached, that the Historical Commission or the Design Review Board will tell the planning board that it doesn't conform, and then they won't be able to grant the special permit. But it was just to insert that language to make that clearer. So that concludes the corrections, changes, and language adjustments for clarification and emphasis. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Tom, I'd like to start with a letter that we all should have on our desks from Historic Salem, Maine. And just to confirm, this letter is addressed to myself and Ben Anderson, the chair of the planning board. And actually, you didn't receive a copy of this, it looks like.
I did get a copy. I'm assuming it's the same letter.
It looks like they've worked with your department, Historic Salem has, to help you craft this, and you took in their comments into this, and they're writing a letter in support of this document. I just want you to kind of test for the record that this is the document that Historic Salem worked with you on, and that, just to confirm that it's one and the same. That
Yes.
the letter of support is for the document that you're referencing here tonight.
Yes, Mr. President, it is.
Very good.
It's the same.
So the letter says that they are in support of this, and they thank you and they praise your department for your work.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been great working with, it's been, the main points of contact have been Emily Udi and Barbara Cleary. And we've had a lot of, many communities, Emily, lots of communication throughout this, so I appreciate their participation, as well as other members of the community, too.
Great, thank you. Before we open up for questions, we have Father Murray here, our friend from Immaculate Conception. He'd like to say a few words before he has to depart to another meeting. So with that, seeing no objection, Father Murray.
Good evening. My simple task is just to say that we're in favor of this for the purposes of our parish, and both at St. James and Immaculate. The buildings right now, as they are, aren't serving anyone. We no longer use them for our educational uses, and so they're just simply laying empty. And I think that this will be this is a great opportunity, we hope, to allow them to be used for housing. So that's it.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, councilors.
Questions for Father Murray while he's here?
I actually,
Councilor Milo.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Father Mar. You reference Immaculate and St. James.
Correct.
There's a third school involved here, correct? St. Anne's?
St. Anne's is, I believe, I don't know if I guess St. Anne's is available, but I'm not responsible for those buildings, so I'm not really sure. So I really can't answer with any
So
confidence.
if we have questions about St. Anne's, who would we talk to?
Then I think I would refer those to first the pastor over there, who's actually brand new, so he's getting caught up to speed on things. And then secondly, I would people at the Archdiocese of Boston, the real estate office at the Archdiocese of Boston would be the place to go.
And I can check with Tom, I'm sure.
Right. Okay.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through the good father. Just a curious question. I know that the different entities that you've looked at to redevelop the two schools specifically that are under your control. Just a curious question. Ballpark. I'm not going to hold you to a number. How many units are we looking at in each school approximately? Do you have any idea from their discussions? Are we talking 30, 50?
Not 50. 30 is a number that's been floated. 30
30 for Immaculate?
30, yeah, 30, 35. Yeah, for Immaculate. I think
Okay.
30, 35 for
Somewhere in that
St.
range?
James, yeah. I think it depends on what the rule of
Right.
how many square feet is necessary for
Okay.
the size of the unit, which is way out of my understanding.
No, I appreciate that. No, because I love social media and how things get out there, and someone says there's gonna be 141 units.
41. I said 44.
140 some odd units down in the, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so.
Well, we have an idea for an underground.
Being underground, yeah, it's gonna have water in it. No, I appreciate it. So somewhere in the 30 to 40 range.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing I'm gonna hold you to. I mean, obviously, and I mean, once they get in there and they start, I mean, I'm assuming you have whatever initial proposal you have with the developer, and they're gonna get in there and shake it out once they know they can actually move forward, and then try
Correct.
to come up with what the number is gonna be.
A realistic,
But,
yeah.
I mean, based on the building itself, somewhere around 3 dozen seem about right.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. yeah.
Council
Thank you.
Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Father, if we're talking 35, 40 units, how many affordable are you looking at?
I believe that the proposal said 20% in each, so as a minimum. So I think the plan is greater than that. But I can't speak to that because I'm really not part of that, the final negotiations. But I think the intention is more towards affordable housing than anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from councilors for Father Murray? With that, I'd like to open up to the planning board. Do you have any questions for Father Murray while he's here? I know he has to leave to another obligation. There being none. Thank you, Father.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council Torrio?
Hey, so I have a question for Tom that's a bit of a clarification, because on this table, B5, that we have an N, but that's because most reuse is by right in the B5.
Through you, Mr.
Your
President.
properties existed there, they're already allowed uses, so they're not exempted. Well, an exempt use, but that use is a permitted use in a B5.
So, through you, Mr. President, the B5 provides more flexibility as of right than the special permit provides, so there's not a value, the special permit does not provide a value in the B5.
Yeah, just want to make sure that was
Yep.
sort of clear for everybody.
Thank you. Tom, I'm sorry, Councilor Madore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Tom. The eligibility, the 3 different criteria, the project has to satisfy all 3, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And does that limit the number of properties that may potentially qualify more so than before?
Through you, Mr. President, yes, the number of properties is between this and the zoning categories as well, the zoning districts, because this is only in the residential zoning districts, so the number of properties is less than what the overlay had before.
And in regards to capitalizing the word building, should we define what that means, what a building means?
So through, building is defined already in the zoning ordinance.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
Any further questions? I'm sorry. Council Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In reviewing this document compared to the other document, what would you say is the biggest change from the one that we didn't pass a few months ago to this?
So, through you, Mr. President, I think the biggest change is that this is defining a use for the use table, and it's a special permit in certain zoning districts. The older version, the prior version was an overlay for the whole city.
Right.
This is a special permit just in certain districts. And the special permit applies only to the building and not to the lots. And then I think the third thing is that defined role for the historical commission when they're outside of jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Tom, if I might, the last time we were together, we raised questions. Let me go to 6.11.1 purpose. And I have 3 issues in total, in 3 different sections. There were comments about the reuse of buildings currently in municipal and religious use. The questions were for how long? And I think you've defined that in here, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President, if you go to the next page, under 611.3,
Yep.
the paragraphs that follow the 1, 2, 3, the first paragraph there defines what a building currently in municipal use means, and the paragraph after that defines what a building currently in religious use means.
Okay, thank you. Under 611.2, there's also the second word, or third word in this one. It says a building currently, but the definition of currently is not in here. And we talked about it at our last meeting. Old schools are not currently in use. So what does the word, in this paragraph, what does the word currently actually mean?
So, Mr. President, again, I just want to direct you back to those two paragraphs on page 2. So, a building shall be considered currently in municipal use if, and then it goes on to define. And the paragraph after that, a building shall be considered currently in religious use if, and it goes on from there. So the currently in municipal or currently in religious use, the definitions for those are in those two paragraphs.
Yep, excellent. I just want to confirm that.
Sure.
It looks really clean, and I congratulate you on making these changes and crafting this whole ordinance. The third and final issue I had was on, it was raised again at our last meeting, under 611.3, eligibility for special permits, number 1, the ending says, is at least 4,000 square feet. We talked about 4,000 square feet of what? There's no definition here. We didn't add anything to it. Is it 4,000, just so that we have clarity, is it 4,000 foot of the footprint of the building, 4,000 square foot of use space on each floor? So if it's a 3-story building, is it the total of all 3 stories? If you see what I'm getting at with that question, there's no definition of what is the 4,000 square feet
So it's 4,000 square feet in the building.
in the building of not just one floor, it's all floors combined.
Yeah.
Should we clarify that, do you think? So that there's no wiggle room?
So I'll defer to the body during the review on that, because for me, it seems quite clear. But if there's ambiguity, then we can clarify that.
It wasn't quite clear to some counselors at our last meeting, so I'm bringing it forward again today because no change was made to that one statement. With that, I'd like to open it up to the planning board members, if they have any questions for our planning director. There being none. Okay, Councilor Sargent, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, just if I could please to go on that currently again. I mean, if that gets written somewhere, they don't always elaborate. If that gets written in some article that says buildings currently in use, currently could refer to something that was last used for religious or municipal use 19 years ago. That doesn't quite jive with something. Current is like current events. It's basically today's news or Time magazine on what's going on today. I don't think current events class would start with something 20 years ago. So that's that currently isn't quite the right word for something that could have last been used 19 years ago for that purpose. So that's how do we make that a little clearer?
Tom, would you like to speak to that, please?
Sure, Mr. President, through you. So again, I think that I understand what you're saying. The day-to-day use of the word currently would suggest that that's right now. What we're doing through this ordinance is defining what currently in that use means in these two paragraphs. So I'll just speak not to this point, but more broadly. I mean, one of the challenges with zoning with ordinances, how we use the term. When we talked about building with a lowercase b, it actually should be capitalized because it's in our zoning ordinance. There's a lot of precision, I think, in the language and in the drafting of this ordinance, so that it is tight and the definitions are included in it. I think that I think it's important to consider the use, how this ordinance is being utilized. It's something that an applicant will be working typically with a land use lawyer and with a planning board in terms of understanding how to operationalize, how to issue the special permit. So I think, again, I think we get into not just this, but other terms that are technical or precise. We've got the sophistication of the planning board that really will be the ones managing the ordinance. And I think if they're clear on what this means, and the planning department staff and the land use attorneys and the applicants are clear, I guess that's why I'm comfortable with it.
Any further questions from the city council or planning board? Oh, council, sorry.
I'm just, I mean, I know, I respect the planning board and everybody involved, but we have to have a kind of a basic use of Webster's dictionary when we're defining things. And like I said, that doesn't quite, fit into the definition of current is something that's going on now. And so when something's, people say, geez, no problem, something currently being used, that's fine. But in the last 20 years, it's a little bit different story. For instance, would South Campus in Salem State College fit into this definition of current? No.
So, Mr. President, it's again, these two paragraphs on page 2 that define what currently is. So, a building shall be considered currently in religious use. I'm doing the second paragraph there. If substantially all of that building was actively used for religious purposes and protected by General Law 40A, Section 3 for at least 20 continuous years, including some point in the last 20 years immediately preceding an application under this section. I'll just stop there. So it's defining what currently in religious use is, and that's saying that the building has to be substantially in that use. It has to be protected, the use that's protected by General Law 40A, Section 3. It has to have been in that use for 20 years continuously, and at some point in the 20 years prior to the application, some of that use has to have occurred. So that's where the definitions are for it.
But I understand that, but like basic things, they have to be, when the average person reads it, they have to understand it. And I believe if the average person reads the word current, they're gonna take the basic definition of it. And so if that said something like current or formerly used, it would fit the definition you're giving a little bit better. And just as a question, there's so many buildings, we don't quite know every building that would be eligible in the city. I don't know for sure, but I'm just asking, would the South Campus of Salem State, the former St. Caridians, fit into this definition?
So, through you, Mr. President, if it was a religious school at some point in the last 50 years, so that would be 1969, then yes. If it wasn't a religious school, if it was just a religious building, then no.
So which it was, so it should be yes. It's former St. Caridian. So
Yep.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Just to clarify, the old former St. Caridian South Campus was also a municipal use as well. It was Horace Mann South. So yes, I think it would qualify for this under the religious area. Okay, what I want this meeting to look like tonight is a roundtable discussion of all issues that the planning board and the city council may have about this ordinance, discuss all the issues possible, anything that we're thinking, and then allow the public comment to speak for and against and ask questions, or to raise comments rather on what we're discussing here tonight. At our last two joint public hearings, that didn't happen. And comments, the public hearing was closed, planning board goes and discusses it without any public comment being allowed at that point, and both times came back with some recommendations that were not discussed at all at those two joint public hearings. I'd rather not see that happen going forward if possible. That's my personal opinion. I believe that at a joint public hearing, we should be discussing the matters and then allowing the public to comment on it, because no public comment will be allowed after tonight. If we do close this meeting tonight, no public comment will be allowed after this at the planning board or at the city council meeting unless we put it back into committee, and the chairperson of that committee is willing to allow public comment at that point. So the public gets really shut out of this process if the public hearing is closed tonight, which I anticipate that it will be. It doesn't have to be. I believe it probably will be. So with that, I'd like to see a discussion of everything so that the public can speak on everything here tonight, put everything on the table. So again, I ask any comments from the city councilors? Any comments from, before we open it up to public discussion, any comments from the planning board? There being none, I'd like to start at this side of the room and come around all the way around. Oh, sorry. Councilor Gerard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, just a quick clarification from you under 6.11.7, the Historic Commission, the blah, 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 the conformance to the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. Are we talking 36 CFR 68 or 36 CFR 67? There's two sections.
It's section 106. It's the Secretary of the Interior standards. I can't quote the, Patty? I'll prefer Patty.
Yes, so
That's right.
standards that are in the circle standards. Yeah.
Clarify which one?
All right, take these last seconds.
Let's get an iPad.
I'm going to ask, Patty, can I have you come up?
I just want to make sure that I understand exactly what we're requiring our boards to follow.
Sorry, Councilor Gerard, can you clarify for the record so everybody here knows what are you asking?
I just want to clarify that what we're asking the Design Review Board and the Historic Commission, what the standards are that they're going to be looking at. There's two sections of the Secretary's, the Interior's requirements, so I just want to make sure I understand which one we're talking about. One is related to the IRS, one is related to other types of, it's like preservation.
Right, so this is the standard, the Secretary of the Interior standards for the
Yep.
treatment of historic properties as the authority under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966.
Okay, that's what they're doing. Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
Patty Kelleher, our wonderful preservation planner.
106 or 108?
Thank you, Patty, for that clarification.
Maybe just make it clear.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you.
That it is
Tom,
16.
Tom, can I back up one second? Sorry.
Tom, just stay right up there.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just for clarification, all that was just discussed up here, we're assuming that whomever is going to redevelop these buildings is going to apply for some sort of historical tax credits, and they're going to meet all the standards of which to apply for historical tax credits in order to make them eligible so they'll receive those credits. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. President, I think that was initially the assumption, but is not always the case. So 5 Broad Street, the Council on Aging property, is not a historic tax credit deal because it's a condominium project. And if you're doing a for sale condominium, you can't get the historic tax credits. So there are still extraordinary costs for, not all the time, but in some instances, for historic adaptive reuse. So 5 Broad Street is one of those instances where, as you're aware, the price that was offered is not something that can be afforded privately. So one would think about historic tax credits coming into play. In this instance, rather than historic tax credits, they're looking at the Housing Development Incentive Program
So the standards.
as the way to come into it. But the restoration of the property, 5 Broad Street, again, still the standard of rehabilitation will be to the Secretary's standards under this special permit.
Thank you. Councilor McCarthy, you have the floor.
Thank you. And we're not going to talk about the last 9 months of the previous thing, but basically a lot of what was in all the work that went into the previous 9 months is now in a table, of which the table is now specified, and the biggest difference is it's for a special permit as opposed to an overlay.
Through you, Mr. President. Yes, that's correct. The prior work, sort of the starting point for this was where the previous effort ended. We're taking a different approach and having it just for buildings, but that work is in here.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the City Council, the Planning Board? Seeing none, I'd like to open up for public comment. Thank you, Tom. Don't leave. You'll be back up there. That's good. We're going to start at this side, go around the room. Just people that would like to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance. We're going to start here. Polly, here. When you approach the podium, for the record, please state your name and address. Thank you.
Polly Wilbert, 7 Cedar Street. Generally in favor of this special permit process. I will share with you a concern that what we lost from the transition from the earlier language to this language is the requirement for an affordability. I don't see how the planning board could turn down a special permit if the housing that was to be produced was all market rate. And I think based on where we are in the economy and the housing cycle, that's something that I don't think that's the preference of the city. And I would ask you to consider some element of required affordability so that we don't lose this opportunity where these buildings are some of the biggest buildings in the city that could conceivably be converted to housing and could end up not providing any affordability.
Polly, you've done a lot of research on this matter, and you've attended just about all the meetings. Do you have a recommendation for percentages or threshold?
I think that the council and the planning department need to sort that out. I'm less concerned about the failure of developers to make a profit. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you also sign in on the sheet as you come up to the microphone? Sorry about that. It's an oversight.
Justin Whittier, 10 River Street. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Board of the Federal Street Neighborhood Association. The board has voted to support this proposed zoning amendment for a municipal and religious reuse special permit. Our support is for the proposal, which I think you've clarified in its amended form, submitted to the City Council and Planning Board on June 12th. This proposal is a reasonable solution to the problem of vacant, non-conforming buildings which lack a path for redevelopment due to their former exempt status. Many of the important changes urged by the public and councilors during the prior MRA-ROD process have been included in this proposal. Most importantly, it removes the concern about expansion of buildings to be redeveloped and focuses on what should be the objective, preserving and reusing vacant historic buildings. The council and the planning board should, however, carefully consider the impact on our downtown parking lots, as this proposal still does contain a provision which would allow developers to supply part or all of their parking in those lots as opposed to on site. We want to publicly thank the planning department and Tom Daniel in particular for the willingness to listen and respond to concerns from the public prior to a formal presentation here tonight. We also want to recognize and thank Historic Salem for the valuable feedback they provided. And in endorsing this proposal, which is a follow-up and a replacement for the MRA-ROD, this proposal is a better proposal, and it's appropriate to recognize and to thank those councilors who afforded us this opportunity by voting against the MRA-ROD. There was a great deal of criticism for those votes. A lot of it was vituperative, but I think the fact that we have this proposal before us tonight vindicates that vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments. Continuing around the room, speaking in favor, please. Right here. His name and address for the record.
Emily Udy, 8 Buffum Street, speaking on behalf of Historic Salem. Just briefly to sort of reiterate what our letter said, we support the ordinance. And I just want to continue to thank Tom and the planning staff, as well as the city council who asked for this path to be submitted. So thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to hopefully an approval of this ordinance.
Continuing around the room, those way back there, please. All the way back. Thank you.
Josiah Fisk, 358 Essex, business address 10 Derby Square. I'm speaking in support of this, and I want to echo mainly what Justin Whittier said. I don't think that anyone would recommend the process that we have gone through as a model to be followed, but I absolutely think that if we get anything good out of this process other than a good proposal for an ordinance, which I believe we have, I think it was perhaps just a reminder of the importance of scrutinizing the language and the structure and the thought behind, the thinking behind, and other loose ends and so forth in proposals that come before the board. I believe that those loose ends have been tied up. I know it has not been an easy job, but I also want to thank everyone, and I do want to thank, I want to echo the thanks to the board for just putting the brakes on the process at a time when it really did need further scrutiny. I know there has been some public, I would say, unfortunate representation of that vote. I think that, I do not think that this board should be held up as an obstructionist body or as an example for why the 2/3 majority for zoning changes should be changed. I think the board was simply doing its job. I think what we have here today validates that. I hope no one in this room ever has to go through a process like that again, but I want to thank everyone for doing that. And two last things. With respect to Councillor Sargent's comment, speaking as someone who is not a lawyer but does legal drafting for a living, I believe you could delete the word currently and retain the meaning of that passage if that would help. And then the other, I want to echo the Polly's comments about affordable housing. We've said, many of us in my neighborhood have said all along, we supported the goals of this ordinance and we support affordable housing. I am assuming that the reason it is not mentioned here, the reason that it's been removed, is because there is the inclusionary zoning ordinance in the works, but I would like to know whether that is in fact the thinking behind that. If someone could answer that question, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Continue. Pause.
Fawaz Abu Shark for Harrison Road. I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I'm generally in favor of this. I was hoping Paulie saves me coming here by actually putting a number. For the longest time we are talking about affordability. I would like to see some numbers. I'm hoping for the 20% affordable, but this is just my hope. She said to leave it to here and there. I think I need more of a solid, in my opinion, since we've been talking for over a year about the affordability ordinance, and this is for affordable housing, and it's this and that. This is a chance to actually make it that thing. So just basically to echo that, my number is 20% among, with the support and whatever they said before. I'm not going to repeat. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Judith Riley of 20 West Avenue. I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters of Salem. We reached a consensus to support this proposed amendment, at least the version that was available on the website, which doesn't seem to be substantially different than what you're discussing here tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and say that we endorse it. We previously endorsed the overlay district, and we realized there's substantial differences between that proposal and this one. However, our analysis remains the same. We believe the changes should be made because of financial responsibility. Salem needs the revenue from the sale of 5 Broad Street to cover the expenses incurred from the development of the new Community Life Center, and failure to adopt a path forward would result in a financial deficit for the city. We need zoning flexibility for redevelopment. The League hosted a Zoning 101 lecture in October of 2018, and we learned about the tremendous complexity built into Massachusetts zoning and local zoning. We recognize that significant changes are needed to alleviate the current housing crisis, but this change will, and those changes will require considerable discussion and compromise, but this use table amendment is very specific to our community and is needed now to provide additional housing and economic development opportunities. We also support it for environmental sustainability and historic preservation. The greenest building is the one that already exists, according to the architect Carl Elefante. And although historic preservation is not a league issue, we do support citizen engagement and advocacy. And over the course of public commentary, we feel that the public has been listened to. We also are concerned that if structures are left empty, they can fall into disrepair and be demolished. We have two final comments on the new version. The League supports inclusionary zoning that works for Salem's needs, and we expect the council to take an inclusionary zoning ordinance up in the near future. Therefore, we're willing to overlook the omission of affordable housing requirements from this particular reuse ordinance. Additionally, we note that the special permits granted under the new uses would require one parking spot per unit of non-elderly, non-handicapped housing, but the same special permit would not allow residents of the newly created housing units to get resident parking permits. We understand that residential parking permit process is currently being reviewed, and we note that we are concerned about policies that would treat residents in new housing differently from residents in existing housing. We would like to see the parking requirements stricken or rewritten, but not at the cost of delaying or derailing this ordinance, whose passage is needed to facilitate the sale of 5 Broad Street, as well as the completion of the 2 affordable housing projects that have been reported in the Salem News. Thank you.
Anybody else on this side of the room would like to speak in favor of this ordinance, proposed ordinance? Start over there, please. Excuse me.
My name is Lori Stewart, and I live at 7 Barnes Road. You've just heard from my colleague Judith Riley from the League of Women Voters in Salem, and I'm testifying tonight as the chair of the League of Women Voters Salem Affordable Housing Working Group. At first glance, it may not seem that this special permit will do anything to alleviate Salem's housing crisis and need for affordable housing, but I'd like to clarify that because currently the North Shore CDC is involved with 2 of these properties, they will be building apartments that will meet the need for 30 to 50% of the area median income, or $48,500. So that's for very low income residents of Salem. 50% of our residents in Salem are rent overburdened, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income towards rent, which doesn't allow them to spend money on other needed items. So this project will actually do something for affordable housing, and I hope you take that into consideration. Judith has also mentioned that inclusionary zoning is coming, and that's something you should be paying attention to. That's it, thank you.
Thank you. Continuing around the room, back row.
Good evening, my name is Mike McGee. I live at 222 Derby Street. We're in a butter to the Immaculate Conception. I'm very happy and pleased with the amount of work everyone is doing here and the good cause it's for. The sanity introduced by saying social media said it was 141 units. I was delighted to hear from the good father it was 35. However, with that said, there's just one, can I ask a question to this gentleman that, on the language?
I will allow it.
What's this?
I will allow it, but ask it through, ask it through me, then I'll ask you.
Okay. In section 611.5, one of the, everything is so tightly described here. I'm grateful for that. But there's a very ambiguous term in here, which says that they can allow this to proceed as long as residential use will not adversely affect the underlying district. And that appears to be a fairly qualitative statement to me. And as a resident and a butter, I'm wondering who makes that determination, and if there's sanity applied to what adversely affects means. And so it's a little ambiguous to me. I'm pleased when I see the tightness of the rest of it, but I'm a little bit concerned, and I'd like to see if someone could address that.
Thank you. Do you have additional questions?
No, I'll just take that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stop the public if we can have Tom come up and answer this one question, please. If we have more questions, then we'll add them all up at the end, then, Tom.
And please remember to sign it. So, sure. So through you, Mr. President, the standard, I think the question is who determines whether the neighborhood's adversely impacted or not, and that's the role of the planning board during the special permit process. So the planning board hears the application and hears from members of the public who want to comment on it, and they weigh and evaluate it. This language is standard for the review process that happens before the planning board and the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, that's great.
Hope that answers your question.
I think so. There's a process for it, yeah.
Thank you. Going to continue around the room. In the back, please. Anybody would like to speak for this draft ordinance, please come in around the room. Right here. Thank you. And you'll be next, sir.
Darlene Mellis, 115 Federal Street. I'd like to second Councilor Sargent's comment about currently. As I was reading through this document, I was very confused by my experience with the public schools and the fact that the Federal Street School was used for 3 different public schools as their own home buildings were renovated, and being very aware of the Boys and Girls Club being in the Immaculate Conception building. So if you can take out currently, so people actually look at those being religious buildings up anytime up until 1969, you say, oh yeah, of course, those were religious schools, but not in much of my adult lifetime here in Salem. So if you just simply say in religious use, if it was in the past 50 years, it's clear. And then you'll be able to apply it to St. Anne's or any other school building that might come up.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm William Bronner, 5.5 Bar Street. I'd like to express my support for the ordinance. I think it will do a lot for Salem to prevent underutilization of property. But like some of the other folks have said as well, I would prefer this to have an affordability component. I think it would be a stronger ordinance with that. Thank you.
Tim, this side of the room speaking in favor. Around the front, right here, and then Jeff. Actually, we'll go right down the line. Right here, you're first. Sorry. You're good.
I'm good. Freeze. Cynthia Nina Soto, 6 Laurent Road. I am speaking not only as your constituent, but also as president-elect at the North Shore Association of Realtors. We have expressed our approval and our support for this ordinance first time it came around. And after having reviewed the changes and having listened to Tom, we are still in approval of it. I understand that there is no affordability component on it. However, we understand that inclusionary zoning is coming soon, and strongly do believe that while this is a living, breathing document, it should have the flexibility to ebb and flow as the city progresses through different times. So I do believe that, yes, there should be an affordability component, but it should be a separate document that underlays this, not only for this, but also for the entire city. So I'm in support. Thank you.
David Friedberg, 57 Britannia Circle. I do appreciate very much the council working very diligently and the planning board for what they've done to bring it to this point, and I am very much in favor of this ordinance. One thing that I think is important that has come up from time to time, and Cynthia just mentioned, the affordability component is really very important. And I think that there have been either cavalier or potentially uninformed people who have made comments about, wouldn't it be great to have 20% or even more affordability? I think that it's important to just remember that it's not necessarily just about profit per se. It's about being able to go forward with a project, which does have some profit associated with that. It's not a dirty word. It's the only way that something can happen. And I hope that that will balance. So if it is 20%, that is going to mean it has to be more units. And if it's lower, which would be difficult, then there would be fewer units. Another thing that I think is very important is the basic supply and demand. If there are a tremendous amount of units that come out of these and other projects that the city takes on or the city allows to have happen, the supply of housing is so low right now. I drove into a neighborhood looking for a property, and every single one of them were under agreement. And it's not an area that I consider a very good area. It's unfortunate because there's somebody for every property. But if we have a lot more properties, the prices will stabilize. I know it sounds pie in the sky, but the more we have, the better off all will be. We need more rental housing. We need more for sale housing, market rate as well. And frankly, the more market rate there will be, if it's flooded supply, the prices will moderate. And as far as parking goes, there's a relationship there in terms of pricing that if something doesn't have parking, it can be a burden to those who are already in the neighborhood, but most likely those who are coming to the city, there are quite a few who are relying on transportation and the MBTA, and so they don't have to have parking. More people are coming from the city and they don't have cars, and they look at this as a great alternative. So I am in support. I hope that things come along the way they have been. And thank you.
Jeff Cohen, 12 Hancock Street. First of all, the inclusionary zoning ordinance, which there's already been public meetings about, not only addresses number, quantities, but parking as well. Father Murray spoke about these buildings not being used and his hope for housing, and I agree with that. Just like Cynthia, I was for the original ordinance, and because there's an urgency, we have a very fast diminishing rental stock in Salem. This would enable us to fulfill the commitment we made, was made by this body regarding the Community Life Center and the payment of that, restoration of historic properties and development of affordable. And because affordable is a term that really doesn't apply to enough people, low-income housing. There's one issue I do have. In the original ordinance, there was a sentence that said that there would be an effort to make buildings sustainable and resilient. However, there was no detail or specifications to make that happen. I'll take issue with Judith. The greenest building doesn't yet exist in Salem. Community Life Center is just barely meets the state minimum.
I'm sorry, Jeff. Can you reiterate that and speak up, please?
I said the greenest building doesn't exist in Salem yet. I do appreciate the zoning board being the permitting body with comment from Historic Commission and Design Review Board. However, I do believe that the Sustainability, Energy, and Resiliency Committee should be included in this process. Currently, to use that term, the minimum requirements that the state mandates are not sufficient as we anticipate the effects of climate crisis that are already upon us. The Enabling Act for the Renewable Energy Task Force, which is now the Sustainability, Energy, and Resiliency Committee, is a state law. And that law requires cities like Salem that have these task force to include these task force or committees in the process. And I hope that this body and the planning board will consider that as it moves forward. But I do strongly support this change. Thank you.
And continuing around the room, I think we got everybody. Is there anybody else in this room that would like to speak in favor of this proposed ordinance? I think we got everybody. Okay, we're going to start this way, coming around the room. Is anybody here to speak in opposition of the proposed ordinance? Starting here, coming around the room. Continuing around the room. Right here, please. Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. I'm Mary Beth Bainbridge, 7 Prescott Street. I'd like to thank everybody that's put so much hard work into creating this current proposal, but I think there are still some major issues that need to be addressed. I'd like to reiterate the concern for affordable housing. I think it's important and it should be listed in here and not simply assume that the standard will be met during the process. I have a question regarding the change of use. It says if it's 4,000 square feet or more. Well, what about if it's only 3,500 square feet? What's the process for that? Doesn't need to be spelled out, but it should be referenced. How might that sort of proposal for a building use be addressed? What would the process be? And my biggest concern is parking. 1 parking space per unit is, in my opinion, woefully insufficient. And if it's senior housing, it's 1/3 of a space, but there's no guarantee that the Salem Housing Authority would always own that building. So what then? You have a space that's 2/3 of a space lacking for every single unit in that building. What then? Public parking is already at a strain. Try getting downtown on a Friday afternoon. Try finding a parking space to go to dinner on a Friday afternoon. It doesn't exist, not easily. I think that reusing buildings is a great way to go, but the idea that we're simply going to rely on parking structures that are already taxed with people that already live here is not a viable solution. I strongly urge the people that are making this proposal address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing around the room, anybody else in opposition? We're on this side of the room. Okay. Did I miss anybody? Is there anybody else remaining that would like to speak in opposition? There being none, seeing none. With that, I'd like to invite our city planner back up to the podium to try to answer some of the questions that were just posed by the public, and then follow up with a discussion of the planning board and city council. I guess I'll, Councilor Terrio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, so one thing that I'll bring up that the last commenter talked about when talking about the size, the dimensional requirements, and being clear that 4,000 square feet applies to the building. My presumption that's an edit that came down from the original 5,000 square foot standard in the original ordinance, and that was the change that I had suggested back when we had this in our committee. The reason I came out at that number at that point, and perhaps the body or the planning board would recommend a further change to it, was that if you go a building that's smaller than that, there's a reasonable chance that that's already would be used as a single-family residence at that point. I mean, most single-family residences are smaller than that, but I figured if you're under 4,000 square feet, that's a building that's small enough that it could be redeveloped as a single-family, wouldn't have to go through any kind of special permit process if it's in an R1.
Excuse me, Mr. President, yes, that's what I understood you're thinking, and I think that's valid.
So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. So if it's larger, and the buildings we've been talking about as the focus of this are substantially larger than 4,000 square feet. They're in the 10,000 and up square feet range.
Yes, yeah.
Tom, to follow up on that, is the definition clear enough so that the 4,000 would include basement space, or does it not include basement space?
It's the building is 4,000 square feet, or 4,000, it's
livable space.
Councilor McCarthy just offered livable space, and I think that, some basements are livable space and some basements are, but it's 4,000 square feet that the change in use is happening. So I think the presumption is that if the basement has an active use in it, then it's habitable space or livable space, and so therefore that's part of the building, 4,000 square feet.
Immaculate Conception be covered by that, for instance.
Yeah.
All right. Tom, couple issues. Can you speak to the issue of what happens if the building is under 3,500 square foot while we're on square footage? As the example that we received was, say it's 3,500, say it's 3,999 square feet. What happens to that building?
So, Mr. President, the ordinance it's 4,000 square feet is the criteria. You're not eligible if you don't meet that criteria.
What happens to the building if it's below the 4,000?
Well, it could be, if it's in an R2 district, then it could be converted to a two-family residence or a single-family residence.
It has to meet the underlying zoning.
Yep.
Or actually, not underlying, it has to meet the zoning.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Couple other questions that were posed tonight before I get to other councilors. Tom, what is the status of the inclusionary zoning ordinance?
Mr. President, so the inclusionary zoning ordinance is still being developed. The Affordable Housing Trust has, I think, met twice since our last workshop, and there's some additional data that's being analyzed specific to looking at what the affordable housing requirement should be for ownership units. That analysis will be done in July. So we expect to have revised language for the trust to consider probably at the August meeting. There may be a preliminary draft in July, but I anticipate that probably a final review of language in August for a submission in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
And may I just expand upon that? So the question was why isn't it affordable requirement in this document?
My next question.
Where it was previously. So so we started this process a year ago, and back then we just wanted to, we knew inclusionary zoning was coming, we didn't know when exactly, so we wanted to sort of codify what has been the practice through the planning board of the 10% affordability requirement. And now that we have actually advanced inclusionary zoning so much, it makes sense to consider what makes sense. As I just acknowledged, we're trying to discern the difference in affordability requirements between rental and ownership units. It's been a tremendous amount of work, lots of community engagement, a lot of analysis, and so that inclusionary zoning ordinance will be the appropriate place to have the affordable housing requirements, rather than trying to pick something that frankly would be somewhat arbitrary in this special permit process here. Just belts and suspenders on that. The planning board is continuing to, through the permitting process, have the requirement that they've had in there, and we know that the three properties that are most likely to make use of this special permit, two of them are being developed by the North Shore CDC, which Father Murray spoke to his understanding it being at least 20% of the units. I believe Mickey Northcup at previous meetings talked about it being a much higher percentage of affordability. 5 Broad Street, the requirement there is 10%, and that is based on the requirements that were stated in the request for proposals. So I think the inclusionary zoning will be dealt with this fall, and that's why it's not in the ordinance tonight.
With regard to the 5 Broad Street, you're saying that it was at 10% is what's required in the proposal. At what income level are you speaking?
So the RFP required it to be 10% at 80%, which again is what the planning board practice has been. So as part of that, just to remind councilors that when the authorization was given to the mayor to continue forward with this, it was understood that, as I referenced earlier, that the development is contingent upon the Housing Development Incentive Program. The terms of whatever tax increment exemption agreement will be proposed will come before this body to sign off on that.
With affordability being such a sticking point in support of, I think, every single councilor in the planning board all the way for the last year, and the lion's share of the public comments being about affordability and in support of affordability, is there harm to put that back in?
Mr. President, I do, for the reason I've just stated. I think that there's going to be, what I anticipate, significant discussion of the inclusionary zoning coming up in the very near term. I think that's the venue for that discussion to happen. The purpose of this ordinance, really in its purest, strip it down, strip everything away. It's about taking some old buildings that don't allow you to do anything with them, and rather than letting them fall into further disrepair, eventually needing to be demolished just through neglect, it's providing a path for them to be utilized for housing. You know, we've put some other, things in the ordinance, but at its essence is about taking old buildings that need a way to have new life breathed into them, and that's what's before you.
Save that for a discussion between the planning board and the city council when we get to that point. Other issues, do you have an issue with the word currently being removed from the 2 paragraphs that we've been discussing?
So, Mr. President, I that's something that I would want to look at rather than, I think that's something that could be considered in the process going forward. I don't want to, the challenge with taking something, a comment on the floor and accepting something is that there's a ripple effect through everything, so it would need to be looked at.
Okay. To better answer that, is that something that you get back to the city council?
I think that...
And to the planning board?
So I think that, so the next step is the planning board's recommendation, and so perhaps there's some language we can talk about through that process.
That's right. You can't submit your comments to the planning board if we close the meeting tonight. That being correct?
Yes, and yeah.
I know I couldn't submit my comments to the planning board after this public hearing was closed 2 times ago. Would you please elaborate a little bit more on the 1 parking space per unit is being too little?
So, Mr. President, this is the same language that was in the ordinance from the get-go the last time around. One of the greatest challenges to reusing properties like this is the requirement to provide parking on site, because in many instances sites are constrained, and providing parking on site becomes a barrier to the project being reused. It's I think if you look in the examples across the country, that's kind of put out there as the #1 barrier. So the objective here continues to be what it was before about, having parking that is, if it can't be on site, that it can be located within 1,000 feet in either a municipal or some other privately owned parking facility. Could be a parking lot. The space requirement of being 1 per unit mirrors what the requirement is in the B5 zoning district for existing buildings. The properties, again, the 3 properties that we're talking about are not in the B5, but are very proximate to it. 1 being immediately across the street, 1 being 3 structures away from it, and the other being a little bit further away from that, but still within walking distance of downtown. So I think for the reasons of just trying to, again, provide a path for these properties to be realistically reused, that's why the one space makes sense. Given where they're located, that makes sense as well. And we're providing the parking option for it to be within 1,000 square feet. I think from a marketing perspective, people generally prefer the parking to be on site, so that's something at 5 Broad Street, the parking is going to all be on site. It's a condominium product, which is different from what the CDC is proposing for the 2 school buildings. And I think public comment was offered earlier about people who are choosing to live in these types of projects oftentimes are not the 2-car household. They may own 1 vehicle, they may own no vehicles. People who want to have 2 cars in a dedicated parking spot will not choose to live in this type of product because it doesn't provide that. One of the wonderful things about Salem is that there's a range of housing opportunities for folks that want to have a garage or a 2-car or even a 3-car garage. There are places in Salem to have that, but these properties are not those.
Can you lastly speak about security insofar as senior housing being 1/3 space required, but there's no guarantee that it will stay senior housing? So what happens if it just switches almost immediately to regular housing?
Yeah,
And they might not have the needed parking.
So the language that's in here for the parking requirement that calls out for seniors, let me just find it. There we go. Okay, the language reads, notwithstanding anything to the contrary, housing built under the jurisdiction of the Salem Housing Authority for elderly and/or handicapped persons shall require 1/3 parking space per dwelling unit. This language is actually repetitive. It already exists elsewhere in the zoning ordinance in the parking section. I believe this was a comment from the planning board that they felt it was important to just drive this point home, that senior public housing for seniors and/or handicapped would have a lower parking requirement. So this paragraph actually isn't needed because it's already in the ordinance. If the housing authority is doing a project, their parking requirements are less. So your question, though, and I think the member of the public's question is, what happens if the housing authority sells their property? This situation exists today. I can't answer that because I don't know what the process that the housing authority would go through for selling their property. It's difficult to imagine that. I think if the housing authority were to sell their property, it's probably going to be a repurposed building with some other uses, a different type of housing product. I don't know.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
I am going to allow a follow-up clarification by Justin Whittier, and then Councilor Flynn, and Councilor Turiel. Justin, you had something to say.
I beg your pardon, I just was going to suggest...
Can you speak to the microphone, because we can all hear you, but for the record, the machine needs to hear you.
I'm sorry, I was just going to suggest finished area with regard to the footage of the square footage of the building. That's typically what's found. If you look at Patriot Properties, for instance, that's their listing for the available square footage in a building. So it's not the footprint, it's the finished area. So footprint times floor, essentially. Floors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn had your hand up, I thought.
No, that was Council
Oh, I'm sorry, wrong hand. I just saw her hand. Councilor Sargent, then Councilor Turiel.
Thank you, Mr. President. For you to Tom Daniels. Tom, the two Catholic schools, the Immaculate and the St. James, they were already under agreement for Mickey Northcutt to redevelop them, if I understand that right. Is that true?
Mr. President, I don't know the status of their agreement. I know they've clearly been working together. I don't know what's been executed or hasn't been executed.
All right, thank you. It was reported that way, but I'm not 100% sure. And both of those buildings are eligible for a friendly 40B if we were to go in that direction, right?
Yes, through you, Mr. President, they're eligible for a friendly 40B. Friendly 40B does not have all of, cuts out some of the other provisions that are in here in terms of review by the Historical Commission or the Planning Board, and it is more limited for what you can do. In terms of the public process, it's more limited. Everything goes before the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Yeah, I just saw, because Mr. Northcutt's done a few friendly 40Bs and they've come out well. And on a 40B, that has to be 25% affordable housing, is that accurate? On a friendly 40B?
Yes.
And Mickey usually does more than that anyway, so I don't think he ever does the minimum. So I think those two buildings are going to be developed, so we're not as pressing with them. I think they're in good shape, but there are other things, and I understand that. As far as Mary Beth brought up, what would happen if something was 3,500 or 3,900 square feet versus 4,000? And my own feeling is that from past experiences, once this zoning is passed, it's eligible for an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So if something was short in one way or another, parking, density, square footage, setbacks and things, it would be eligible to go to ZBA for at least an application for a variance, right?
Through you, Mr. President, so this ordinance, the planning board is a special permit granting authority here. Right. And so if the eligibility requirements are not met, then the special permit is not available.
All right, I see. Okay, I'll go with that. See, the other thing is the affordability component, and it's been brought up tonight. And in waiting for the inclusionary zoning, if this is passed and something is approved before the inclusionary zoning is passed, then we can end up with 0% affordable housing because it would not be not be an ordinance yet. So it would be, if they gave affordable, it would be as a gift more than by zoning or something that they have to do. So that's a possibility. But the other thing is, I just want to compare somebody that's going to build, say, 100 units by right with zoning and everything in place and no need for a special permit, no need to go before the ZBA. With the inclusionary zoning, whatever that percentage comes out to be, they're going to have to give a certain percentage. And then you take somebody who's been given a large gift in the sense of a zoning change and this special permit process, they would be on the same playing field. They'd have to give the same amount of affordable housing. So it's my feeling that when somebody is given something versus what they're allowed by right, they should give a little bit more. Because without this passing and without the special permit, something wouldn't be allowed to be developed. So I believe that they should give a little bit more, whatever that may be, than somebody who has, the land in place and the zoning by right and doesn't need a special permit. So that's just a comment on that. And the last thing I have is, would you be able to give us a list of every property in Salem that would fit into, that would be eligible to apply for a special permit should this zoning pass?
So, Mr. President, we have a list of properties that, again, this is 50 years from the date of application, so I can tell you the properties as we understand them to be as of this date.
All right. Whatever you can do to help us on that, thank you.
Yeah.
Council Sergeant.
No, I'm
you have the floor.
I'm all set, thank you.
You sure? Yeah. Okay. Council Torrio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, so I want to, I think, clarify something on the Salem Housing Authority reference here. They are, as a state body, they would be an exempt use as well, wouldn't they? So I think they would have, were they to engage with any of these properties, they would have a by right to make those changes as a state and therefore exempt institution. So if they were to take the Old State Caridians or any of these, they'd just be able to do as they felt they needed to.
Mr. President, I think you're right.
Okay, but having that standard for parking is,
Let me clarify that. They can't do as they feel they should do. They need to follow the state laws.
yeah.
Yes.
But state supersedes
Absolutely.
city and municipality, so
They
they're
would
an
be-
they're an exempt institution like any state body or anything else. That's why we have a big garage.
My understanding is that the housing authority being state would be exempt from all local ordinances with the
All local zoning.
exception of the Wetlands Protection Act and
Yep.
our local ordinance. They need to follow the
Correct.
wetlands rules, if you would.
Correct, which are state standards. So that's the main point that I wanted to just sort of check with on it. As far as the properties go and the affordability component, I appreciate that we are looking hard at the affordability, and I'm looking forward to seeing the inclusionary zoning come forward and establishing what that standard is for construction as projects are developed. In these cases, I think really, because what we're essentially boiling this down to at this point is coming up with zoning regulations that allow for properties in particular to be redeveloped and possibly some other ones down the road that aren't already eligible by right because they're in the B5, for instance, or they're in zones that already allow for this use. It's only in the zones where this is not normally an allowed use. So in those cases, because we're talking about only one of those projects, one of those sales projects is an ownership project, which is the Broad Street one, where that's being sold by the city for use as a condominium, and there's already an agreement in place with a certain amount of affordable, it was either 1 or 2 units in that. So that's one. The other side, the other 3 properties that are currently covered by this are going to be rental properties because the church is not selling them. They're doing a 99-year lease. That was in the original discussion. So any of those will be rental properties and kind of covered for a separate standard. And then in the case of North Shore CDC, which the church has selected to do the Immaculate Conception in St. James redevelopment, we know from experience with the CDC that their affordability range and standard is far higher than the 20% that we're talking about here as a floor on the floor. So the only real property where there's a question about what the affordability standard would and should be, and maybe you can clarify what the planning board can determine with this, would be the property on Jefferson, on Cleveland Road, off Jefferson Avenue, the church school there, where that's a different developer, is selected, and that would be built to potentially a different standard. So that's, if you can clarify kind of what the planning board process for establishing affordability would be under current regulations?
Mr. President, through you, so the current practice of the planning board is to require 10% of the units to be affordable at 80% AMI. That practice has been in place for a number of years. The standard is based on sort of kind of the vanilla standard that's used. We know that that's not sufficient or adequate, and our work over the past year in terms of our affordable housing, our housing agenda and inclusionary zoning as one component of that, made that very clear. So as I think everyone on the council has been to at least one of the workshops and presentations, the private sector delivers a certain number of units at a market rate. They're incentivized to make a profit. There's a certain amount we can push on that and say, well, you can make your money, but we want some percentage of those units to be below market rate. And so what the practice has been is saying, well, 10% of those units are going to be below market rate at 80% AMI. We know that 80% AMI, though, is kind of like market rate here. And so that's not where we're advancing from inclusionary zoning policy perspective. What we've been talking about for rental is a 60% area median income, still at 10%. Some people say, well, why don't you do more? Why don't you make it 15% or 20%. And that's a great, approach, but you get to a point where you don't have a development proposal that can work. Moreover, through our workshops and our engagement with the community, what people have said is more important than the percentage is the level of affordability. So rather than having 15, one of the trade-offs that we've seen is we could have 15% of the units affordable at 10% of area median income, but the strong feedback is saying no, 10% of the units at 60% area median income. That's where we need to be. But the planning board, in absence of this ordinance, this inclusionary zoning ordinance, is working at the 10% of area median income at 80%, 10% of the units at 80% area median income. I go back to the one project that Councilor Turiel is talking about is 5 Broad Street. That's the city's project. There is a subsidy that's required. We have said that, it's a 10%, we told the development world that 10% of your units need to be affordable at 80%. So that's what it is. There may be an opportunity through not through the planning board permitting process, but through our negotiation about saying, well, maybe if you're coming in for a tax increment exemption agreement, rather than 10% at 80%, maybe that's 10% at 60%. That's separate from any of the permitting process, though, because we're selling the property, so we have a different role. It's unique.
Thank you. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, you just hit the nail on the head. Anytime we're going to have a municipal building that we're going to try to convert into housing, we're going to have to declare it surplus and then try to sell it. So when we declare it surplus, isn't that the time that's the time where we can say, okay, we want to make it 10% of 20. We already put out an RFP for 10 Broad Street. It was at 10% at 80. We can't change those parameters. Those were set years ago. So going forward, every time we list a property, if there are any, I'm not speculating there are, but if there were to be one down the road, then this room full of 11 of us would then declare the building surplus and then could say, okay, because when you look at a sale like that, and someone's not going to buy a piece of property per se unless they're a huge developer that's into apartments that want to convert it into apartments. It's going to be sale for reuse, and it's going to be more than likely converted into condominiums. The tricky part is anyone who's been to those workshops knows, is when you stop playing with those numbers. Because if you stop playing with the affordability numbers off the percentage, then depending upon the type of development you're in, if you create properties that are expensive, then you limit the amount of people who can actually afford them because of their affordability range. They can't qualify for a loan from the bank in order to buy one. And the city doesn't have any kind of those incentivized programs to offset that. But when you look at the church properties, all those properties, because they're 99-year leases, as my councilor across from Ward 5 said, those are all 99-year leases. They're going to go after every tax incentive, historic tax credit, everything they can to make them affordable. I don't know, I have no knowledge of what their deal is with, but I'm assuming the Archdiocese's approach, when they went out for an RFP for the developers, they're very keen on the sense that these are religious buildings and they want to reuse them and they want to meet a need. So I'm assuming that they didn't say we want to put in high-end luxury apartments next to the church. They wanted something that people make it more affordable. What that agreement is, I mean, I've had a conversation with Mickey. I know that number, when we started talking with them, he says, well, we don't even use those numbers. We're way beyond that. But that's that specific developer, assuming that, because of the actions we've been taking, that's over 2 years ago. I don't know where they are in this process with the agreement. I mean, I don't know what their length of agreement was for that. They may be looking at another one. I have no idea, because it's been probably 2 years since they first put it out. When they wanted to, when the Archdiocese first approached the city looking for a way to repurpose or reuse these properties. But all those are going to be rentals. So the rentals, you have more flexibility playing with the income levels because it's rental, and someone's going to be managing those properties, so they can work with those. But when you talk about ownership, that's tricky because you're taking a lot of us out of the mix, where you're dealing with a bank. You're dealing with a specific entity that's going to be people have to qualify. And if you're talking someone who's, 60% of mean income, that's going to be financing a $350,000 to $400,000 condominium, they're not going to qualify, unfortunately. So, I mean, I think that when we look at this, we have to realize that there is going to be an affordability to this. And when I read the first paragraph of this, it's about reuse of buildings, historic buildings. Nowhere in any of the paragraphs in it does it say anything about, it's an affordability ordinance. It's about reusing buildings, and if affordability works into that, that's great. I mean, should it be specifically spelled out? I'm not sure. How do you spell out affordability in a use table?
Councilor Fury.
This whole process has been overall very positive. And this meeting has been very positive. Some of us watch the TV program on WGBH, This Old House. This process, this meeting, should be called These Old Buildings. What do you do with these old buildings? And they need tender love and care. At the Immaculate Conception Church, Father Murray expressed very sincerely, as a pastor, his building is falling apart. The Boys and Girls Club was in there. The windows were falling apart. The sashes were falling apart. The Boys and Girls Club had to go to the McCollins Middle School because the longevity of that school and the safety of that school. By Tommy St. Pierre and the building inspector said, not a good future for the Boys and Girls Club. So they moved up. St. James School. I taught 30 years, CCD there. My brother was a custodian there. That building is in need of dire repair, tender love and care. We all know the Council on Aging. I'm 71 years old. We have a new Council on Aging already, a brand new one, long overdue. So this whole process, this meeting has been very positive, and hopefully we can see light at the end of the tunnel. My question to you, Tom, would be, what's the time frame? What would be the first steps to see people moving in? Because affordable housing, low-income housing that we're talking about tonight, whether it's 1, 2, or 5, 10%, 20%, there's a long waiting list. The old St. Joseph's school was torn down. 1,000 people applied for that. 1,000 people applied for the old St. Joseph's complex. It's a critical need because housing has a human face, low income. But what's your time frame? When the planning board sees it, what's your time frame for possibility of actually seeing St. James, the Immaculate Conception being lived in?
Mr. President, through you, for St. James and Immaculate Conception, as I understand it, I believe the North Shore CDC, they need to figure out their financing model. And so some of you may recall that originally the team that responded to the to the diocese was a combination of Salem Renewal, the PABICs, and North Shore CDC. And one of the things about that was they were looking to do a project that did not rely upon low-income housing tax credits, because low-income housing tax credits, you typically have to wait 2 or 3 years to access those from the state because there's so much demand across the Commonwealth for those tax credits. So the idea, I think, that the PABICs and North Shore CDC had was, we partner together, we can do a market deal, have a lot of affordability in there, but we'll be able to structure that to work. You may recall Dick Pavick was at a previous public hearing and spoke to this and said they actually got out of the project because the numbers just didn't work for them. So North Shore CDC is still there, committed to doing housing there. I don't know the status of the agreement, but the financing will need to come together. If they're looking at low-income housing tax credits, it's going to be, they need to go through permitting before they can actually submit the full application. And part of it's the timing for when that application happens, but it's 2 to 3 years out on the financing for them, and then construction. For 5 Broad Street, that's a bit different because it's not dependent upon the, it's different financing, it's private financing. That project has to go through permitting. We have to finalize the terms of the land disposition agreement. And there's, as I said, there's going to be a matter before you in terms of the tax increment exemption agreement as part of the Housing Development Incentive Program. So that's a process that can be happening, this calendar year. Then they apply to the state for the HTIP piece and work through their financing. So first half of next year, hopefully that's all in place, and then they can start construction. It takes a long time, and it kind of drives me crazy how long it takes for things to get done. And it's not, it's not like people aren't trying, and the city doesn't have good processes and really good review boards and things. It just takes a long time, particularly for the not-for-profit developers who need to get their subsidy from state agencies. I'll contrast this all with the First and Traders Way project. It's 212 apartments. It's permitted. It's all privately done. There's an affordable housing requirement, but it's all being financed privately. And they got permitted very efficiently last year. Site work is underway, and they're ready to start building. So it's not as though everything takes a long time. It's just, that's an empty site. It's a lot of site work that's going on there, but it's an empty site. It's not an old building, and there's not low-income housing tax credits that are needed.
The floor.
When I asked Mickey Nokoff, when he was at a previous meeting, what would it look like? And he said possibly it looks like the Edward School on the corner of Rantoul Street and School Street in Beverly on 1A. And many of us would go by the Edward School and think nothing of it. My nephew and niece went to that school, in Rantoul Street. It is such a plus to the neighborhood. But when you go further down Rantoul Street, it's a concrete jungle. A big high-rises, all the way down to where Friendly's was. The new junior high school, middle school. So that example would be a nice example for what could happen to the Immaculate Conception into St. James. Be very conducive to the neighborhood, positive to the neighborhood itself. So I think I'm looking for with great optimism with this meeting tonight and the process of going to the planning board. Hopefully, very soon, in our time, St. James and the Immaculate Conception, we look like the Edward School on Rantoul Street. Keep up good work. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Councilor Fury, I agree with your comments. The planner's done a good job at this, and we're getting to a product that I think is so much better and protects our neighborhoods, et cetera. So good job across the board for everybody on working on this. But we need to be clear that this is not just about these three properties, Immaculate Conception, St. James, and 5 Broad Street, or 4 properties or 5 properties. This is about all available properties throughout the whole city. So we need to make sure that we get this right, because there's probably several properties that we're not even discussing tonight that will fall into this, and that may fall into this in 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So we just need to make sure we're crossing our T's, dotting our I's. And I think we're doing that tonight. So thank you, Councilor Fury. With that, I'd like to ask the planning board for any input on 3 specific things. On the lack of affordability with this proposed ordinance, on the parking requirements, and then the word currently, if you have any ideas on maybe taking that word out or replacing that word or changing it. Would anybody like to tackle that from the planning board? Chair, Ben Anderson.
Related to currently, I think that language, I agree with Tom, should be studied and also comes to the city solicitor. I think it's important enough. I personally don't have an issue with it. I understand it's described in the paragraphs, but maybe another look for some clarity on that would be helpful. What were the other two?
Lack of affordability in the whole document.
In the lack of affordability, the way I'm reading this is this potential special permit ordinance is just one piece in an overall strategy with the city for affordability. I would hate to try to assign an arbitrary number when this process is, relatively in the beginning stage, because there's several other things that are going to be coming in front of this board. I think it's important to react to these properties that exist today. I don't think, I'm confident that the right number will be assigned at a future date, but I think right now it's important to get at least this step through and then look at these other potential changes to zoning ordinances, inclusionary zoning, all these other pieces to see, how they affected us. I think taking this step by step is the right move. I think trying to include everything in one piece or try to, front load or overload this component of it is a mistake and would have to go back and be changed later. I think the planning department is looking at this correctly, sequentially, and I think this makes a lot of sense to me personally at this point.
Thank you. And the last issue was on parking, that there'd be too little or residential issue on parking and the use of municipal parking lots, parking in general.
Well, I think, when I think of it, I look at the properties that are being discussed, the potential existing properties that we have. Zoning ordinances, when those buildings were created and built, aren't the same as they are today, or the parking requirements aren't the same. It would be very difficult to get a lot of parking on a lot of these sites. Some potential sites don't even have, realistically. So I think, the model to use it, I think it's replicating B5. I think it's a good one. I think that's appropriate for, as Tom described, the type of uses and the target market for this type of building. I'm certainly comfortable with that number.
I'd like to add to that. Just with parking, when we're talking about multifamily housing, first of all, it's really important to understand the statistics that people who live in multifamily housing tend to own fewer cars per household. So that's why that's reflected there. The other piece is one of the greatest impediments to affordable housing creation is actually the inclusion of overly burdensome parking, because parking costs a lot of money. It takes up a lot of space, and it takes up a lot of money if you have to structure it. So that's one of the if you're going to talking about creating affordable housing, if you're going to get hung up on more than one car per household because you're choosing the right to park on the street over someone's right to have a house, I think we have a bigger discussion to have here. And I think that's something to really start considering when we start arguing about parking over housing for people who need it. But also within the profession I work in, one of the greatest things that we actually work with every day is balancing the needs to park over the needs for people to live and the cost to do that. So I would please advise people to start thinking with actually compassion about the need for people to live as opposed to your right to park on the street. That's my personal opinion, but also my opinion on the board, and I don't want that to get lost in this discussion, because I think it's lost in almost every discussion I hear, no matter if it's this community or every community that I work in. So that's just my take, my personal take, but also my position on this board, and I think housing should always land out over parking. There we go.
I think we've covered everything on my list with the exception of one that it was an oversight. I meant to ask you 4 issues, but you did a great job in the first 3, so I'll ask the 4th. We had comments, and it's here in our document in the mayor's letter, talking about sustainability and resilience. If the planning board can comment on that, and then we can move forward.
Personally, I certainly support sustainability. I would, at this point, I know the difficulties involved in redeveloping these types of properties, and I think that may be a larger discussion, and probably, as I said previously, about sort of burdening this piece, a modification of a special permit. I think there's a tendency to try to solve all the problems in one piece here, and I think that's a much larger discussion related to Salem zoning ordinances, or in the city of Salem in itself. One of the residents here mentioned resiliency, which is also another big issue, huge topic. Now, I think that's a much larger discussion than this little, I shouldn't say little, but the one component that we're discussing tonight. I think we need to stay laser focused on what's in front of us. Councilor McCarthy mentioned that it's really to reuse these buildings at this point, and then the other pieces will come along at a later date, but I think it's important to focus on what we have in front of us today.
I agree. But I want to point out the mayor's letter to us talked about sustainability and resiliency, but yet the ordinance doesn't speak to that at all.
No, but I think that, like I said, that's a much larger discussion, and I'm confident that will be discussed at a later date.
Great. Any other comments about these or any other issues from the planning board? Yes.
I would agree with Ben, although I think that
very clear, and it's defined later on in the document, so I have no problem with that language. And the other issues of the parking, affordability, yes, I think it is a giant issue, and I think it's much better dealt with in the inclusionary zoning. That's the kind of thing that we need to have the work done for that document, and we shouldn't be trying to solve the problem with this stuff. I agree. That's one.
Thank you, Helen. Any other comments from the planning board on anything before us tonight? About anything not before? No, I'm joking. Any comments or concerns, questions from the city councilors? There being none. With that, do I see a motion on the floor? Council McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the hearing be closed.
Second.
Seconded by Council Terrell. All those in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it.
I further move that the matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation.
Second.
Second, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. Council Fury.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. President.
All those in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony here tonight. We all appreciate it. Thank you.